שלום עליכם فرجونا رحيمة بشانك منوخم تحرزتو حرتو ديلونويتو كتيو إسبوثو وسيفو وقت العامود هابي على عامو سوريو أو ثرويو أو روميو كالدويو أديو مقدورشينا لعم بث صوبوية حزينا بين درغو ماتي مخسرة دبث صوبوية ليكو ماتن أبو حونت سيمي خدمرو لامبوري خلام السنة من كيبان مستفدينا ما بث صوبوية على أبو حونت كسيمي مو خاصك تلي عمت لو ثضيفة حمنت كتيو أنفر تشترز كتيو ياتيو مخسرة راح وقت كله كتيو قريلة سيكولوجي دي توديثو يعني ومنطق دي توديثو من دورك مشتاعي بوكنشو وبو عماحة دوبرنوشو كتلي عمي سنة دوكنشو كتيو فوات دينيز كتلي بس دكتورة وتكمقرب أوربرو يونيفرسيتيت سوسيولوجي lecture in أوربرو يونيفرسيتي وكتلي سنة بروفيسور ديفيد جاونت كتيو لاتيو عليموسي ولاتيو معاميدا السنة سويدويو كتيو بروفيسور بمكتب زبنو بروفيسور هيستوري historical professor or history professor of history okay that will be better خد شمعتو قدو ياثي بو انجليشويو وموخا السنة مانولخون اعدو ان شاء الله قدرتو مستفديتو من تحرزت ايضا very welcome to the program will be held in English so many of you can understand the things we are going to try to explain to people today. I mentioned that I have Fuat Deniz, PhD in Sociology, Örebro University lecture, and Önver Cetrez, Uppsala University, Psychology of Religion, lecture as well. And we have Professor David Gaunt, Professor of History. Very welcome to this program. I will start with right ahead with the issue. What can we say about the Sayfo, the genocide on the Suroyo or Suroyo people, Chaldean people? What level has it reached on academical point of view? We'll start with David then.
It's come very, very far. We know now a lot. We know the extent of the number of massacres, the ethnic cleansing of Hakkari Mountains, the ethnic cleansing of Urmia area in western Iran. We know a lot about the massacres in Tur Abdin, the Jazeera area of Syria. We have also collected a lot of oral testimony, but also documents from all parts of the world, so that we no longer just have the oral history of Hino and others to base a history on, but there are Turkish documents, Russian documents, German documents, Arabic documents, and for us historians it's very important that we have many different pieces of evidence independent from each other saying the same thing, which we now have. So this is not any longer a legend that is told within families, but something that we can say, this actually happened.
So there isn't any doubt whether this is a genocide or not?
Oh no, that discussion is
it's over already.
It's over. It's only Turkish diplomats and a small group of historians at the Turkish Historical Society who insist that this is not a genocide, also that the Armenians have not had a genocide, but there's such a small group now and losing ground all of the time because the opening of the Turkish archives has made this possibility to go and check what is in the oral legends. You now can go and see. There's a telegram from Önver talking about the attack on Azak, and these people shall be eradicated. Here is a telegram from Talat saying that the Assyrians shall be deported from the Hakkari Mountain area. Here is another telegram from Talat saying we shall empty the prisons of the prisoners and they can become part of the gangs that will take the deported people down to the desert. We have also from the governor of Diyarbakir, Rashid, a telegram that he sends to Talat saying, Talat, I have just sent 120,000 Christians from my area. There are no more Armenians left in Diyarbakir to send any longer. These kind of documents we now have, and this is actually a very good situation for saying what actually happened.
And the level it has reached, Fuad, on academical level.
I think David is very knowledgeable on this area, since he has been research on this topic at least a few years, and is also doing research right now on this topic. So from one point of view, I think it has reached the level to the academic world. But I think at the same time it depends what you compare with, so to say. I mean, if you compare with how much is done on this topic in comparison with the Holocaust, it's very little. So I would say that yes, it has reached the academia, and there's many disciplines doing research on this, like in the discipline of history or sociology or science of politics. But I would say this is the very first step. It has recently reached the gates of the academia, and I would say it has been two main obstacles to this, and the first is, I would say, internal. That's say within the group, within the nation, the Assyrian nation. Namely, it's very simple, and that's because the level of our education, it has been very low. We have not had.
But now we have reached a level that we have now our own.
Yes, now we started to finish our PhDs. We start to work at universities, which means that we are also capable to doing research on scientific grounds. So that's the internal obstacle, and the external obstacle is the denial. The denial from different parts around the world, and denial and lack of knowledge, which means that it's more research could be done, and I hope and I'm sure that more research will be done, because the level
denial from who? You mean the Turkish?
Well, of course they play a very active role, but although I agree with David that it has diminished this obstacle, but I think there is denial from other parties also, not only
among ourselves,
not ourselves, but in our host societies, but mainly also because of lack of knowledge, which means that you don't do research on a topic you don't know exists. What I mean is, I do not suggest that it's only Syrians who's going to do the research. The opposite, rather. I think it's very important and necessary that we do research from different national backgrounds, but I think it takes time.
David, you want to say something?
Yeah, I'd say that, well, in some ways, we now know more about the situation for Syriacs, Chaldeans, and Assyrians than the Armenians know about their situation, because the Armenians have done a lot of research, but they have mostly been looking for, has there ever been a decision made by the Ittihad Taraqi committee saying that there should be a plan for exterminating the Armenians? They have not found that. This is so they've been looking for the big political solutions. We have been using the oral testimonies of people and then checking it against other documents.
It's a bigger job.
It's a harder job, and all of a sudden we find out that we know more details about what happened to Syriacs and Assyrians than the Armenians know about what actually happened to their own people. So that now when Armenians are having their conferences, there's almost always someone who is going to talk about the Syriac or the Assyrian.
To find out the details, you mean, what happened that time?
Exactly. What they now can begin doing themselves, because I have a feeling that they were too over-intellectualized and were thinking that it must lie in some political decision. And we have a situation for the Syriacs and the Chaldeans that there never came an order saying that you must go. There was one for the Assyrians, but in this case, we must put together what happened from what actually did happen, because we can't find out what they are talking about.
Önver, you would like to say something, I think?
Yes, I would like just to relate back to Fuat's point that I think we have to also specify a little what kind of knowledge we have today, and the historical knowledge is probably the starting point as a discipline to look at what has happened, and that is the very important base. But I think we also have to go on continuing with from new perspectives, like the psychological dimension of a genocide on several generations, even the role of religion or religiosity. The political perhaps is also a little elaborated, I'm not sure about that, but I think there are different disciplines, and in these disciplines I'm talking about, I think the knowledge is much, much more limited.
Fuat, you want to say something on this?
Yes, I would give as example what I meant, that there is a kind of resistance, maybe not denial, but resistance to this, like the decision taken in the Swedish Parliament 3-4 years ago. I mean, if they had decided that genocide has taken place, I think that would have made it much more easier for us as scholars to try to get funds for doing research on this topic. So I mean, by these obstacles, there are of different kinds.
Yeah. Is it important to find out whether this is a political genocide on the people, the Suroyo, Oromo, Syria people, Chaldean, or is it enough to find it has been occurred?
This is difficult to say. This is something that we, I don't know, psychologically, I suppose you would say that this is extremely important to know why they did this to us. Is it just because they wanted to take our houses and land? That's one thing. Is it because of our religion, because we were non-Muslims? Or is it because we didn't fit into a grandiose scheme for making a new Turkish identity, and all small groups, whatever kind, Muslim or non-Muslim, didn't fit in and had to be either eradicated or turned into some kind of ethnic cocktail? It's hard to say, but you need to know why a perpetrator did something to you, and otherwise you go around with a trauma that can go over generations. I think we have studied this because you don't have an answer to this, and I think an answer both saying, okay, we did it, and why they did it is very clear. I mean, in the Holocaust case, you know, you have this racial scheme, you have the Nazi ideology, and you have an apology. So we know why things were being done.
Yeah, Önver, what is your answer to that question?
I agree
why?
with David. I think more than answering the question of why, I would say that the question itself is important, and that is probably what is being asked today by the youth, as well as, you know, the youth that haven't actually experienced this indirect or just have heard about it. So the question of why is still very, very relevant, and I think that is relevant for one dimension in our life, and that is for our identity specifically.
I have a question regarding the youth, so we can take it already now since we're there. Fuat mentioned earlier that this was the 5th generation now. What effect has it done to, or what marks can we see on these people, even though it's 90 years ago this occurred? Önver. Well, looking to the identity, of course.
Yes,
That's your field more.
I mean, the investigations which have been done, Fuat has done some, I've been doing a little, and then there are some few more, but I think they are still limited. I think we have to be also a little, at least from my own perspective, I'm a little careful. We need more knowledge on that. But
what kind of knowledge would you like to have?
I think we need to look at what this, for example, what the storytelling of parents and grandparents mean, how that has been given over from generation to generation, what that means for the youth growing up here as Assyrians in a new society, what it means to be linked to a geographical area and with a specific historical background. It also means, I think it has to be related to, as David pointed out, the identity as the religious identity. So there are different dimensions I think we have to.
But the Sayfo, over 90 years ago, still having this strong effects on the generations after. Fuat?
Yes, but I think the answer from my point of view is very obvious, because now we're talking about Sayfo, the genocides taking place 1914 to 1918. And I always try to stress this when I'm debating this topic, and that was maybe the biggest event, or the most tragic event. But we mustn't forget that a lot of similar
genocides,
massacres took place before and also after.
Similar, for instance.
Yes, similar, for instance. And that means that those wounds which were attached to the people, they are, so to say, riven up again. Every time there is a political insecurity and it's ethnic conflict in the area, it's like reminding us of what has happened.
Frightened you that could happen again, maybe?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I'm very sure, and a lot of people in my surrounding, not least my parents' generations, which were the grandchildren to the
one who were killed.
Yeah, to the one who were killed. They have this insecurity, and I think that as long as the states in the Middle East don't give any guarantees, for instance, respecting the rights of minorities, you do have this insecurity, and that's why it's also kept alive. Because I think if these states, if they had recognized what had happened on moral basis or on political or juridical or giving back properties, whatever, I think that would have started a healing process a long time ago. And secondly, the most important consequences, or one of the most important consequences, is that the people are not anymore in their homeland. We are in diaspora. We are living in different countries, and we have it very good, for in Sweden and in Europe, in democratic societies and all that. I think we're very happy with that situation. But nonetheless, the very status of statelessness is creating insecurity, because you don't know your future.
You're not in your own homeland.
Exactly.
And you know that.
Exactly.
In some way.
Yes. So the answer to your question about this fifth generation, it's because this wound or this trauma is alive. It's actually acted daily in the interaction, in the oral tradition. So I think they are connected to this. So yes, it took place for 100 years ago, but I think it's very much still alive.
Önver?
Just to continue on that topic, I think this is a very large topic, so we're gonna get stuck here for a while. But the happenings in history are a part of our culture even today. It's a part of our body. I mean, the way we relate to other people is very much based on stories told to us by our parents and grandparents. For example, obviously, how I relate to a Muslim individual is also based on these stories. How I even relate to the Swedish dominant society is also based on these stories, because I could just take a very simple example. Because this is related to acculturation and migration, and the reason why we've come here, or my parents have chosen to come here, is that they want to find a new future. And in order, this becomes an existential question in Sweden, because they wanted to survive as human beings. So if we kind of forget the stories that have been told,
the reasons why they are here now.
Exactly.
And why they can't be comfortable.
If you lose those stories, then you've also lost the reason for migration itself. And that is a very scary and also an existential issue for the people who chose to migrate. That's why, I mean, it's on a kind of an existential level, which is very important to bring forth.
You want to say something more about that?
Yes, I mean, it's such a devastating experience for a people to experience such a thing like a genocide. So, I mean, it decreases in a very big way the numbers of the people. It disconnects you from your homeland. It destroys your social organization. It destroyed your cultural heritage. It killed your intellectuals. It destroyed your documents. So, yes, it takes time to repair these kind of things, and especially if you don't have the means and the rights to repair.
So you mean that now in the diaspora we have the means, we have the possibilities, and now it's starting. The work is starting for us as people.
Absolutely. I mean, look around, and you know this from your work here in media and so on. In political terms, in terms of scholarly work, in terms of culture events, and so on, and so much has happened this last 5 or 10 years. And how can you explain that? Well, one reason must be that there was something unsolved in this collective consciousness or collective soul, and it has to be articulated. It has to be come out, and now you have these opportunities in this Western democratic societies.
You want to fill in that?
I think that is an important issue. I think we have, though, that we have in all the time in different generations tried to solve the effects of the happenings in history. I think they have been present in history with my parents and grandparents as well. It's just that I suppose that what differs the situation today is perhaps that we deal with it perhaps in a more creative way, in a more positive way, I would say, than the previous generations. And here I'm not a historian, so I should be careful, but I think...
Go ahead.
I think the way we see, as Fuat brought up, how people deal with it today is very much more positive. We create a culture of telling stories, of writing literature, of paintings, of music, of theater, which all reflect the different experiences in history. And this way of dealing with our history is, of course, much more creative.
It's a leaking process.
Yes, it is. Compared to perhaps the older generations who would more hide or take a step back and
or maybe
feel
speak
inferior.
among ourselves, not freely to speak out.
Exactly. So I think the way we deal it is, I suppose, much more positive today than it has been.
Well, but yes, I agree. It's obvious because, I mean, we have other conditions.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think there's several variables here, and the first is, of course, the time aspect. I mean, I can imagine that the survivors, they must have been so traumatized, at least in the first years. So probably they even couldn't talk about it. And this you can, I think, find in psychology. I mean, if you take on an individual level, if a person has been experienced something very, very awful, it takes time because it's a kind of a denial. You deny what has happened because it's so heavy.
Only to survive.
Only to survive, and then later you maybe can start to talk about this. So that's the time aspect. But secondly, it's the surrounding society. I mean, in countries in Middle East, people didn't dare to talk about it. I mean, look at what happened at Father Joseph in Tarabdin a few years ago. He said, well,
could that be
the genocide took place, and he was immediately sentenced. So that means that I think there was a great feeling or need to talk about this, again, because it's such a heavy trauma, but the surrounding didn't allow you. But when we come here, yes, we are allowed to talk about it.
The surrounding as well. Have they had the same problem? They couldn't even speak about it themselves. That's one of the reasons, maybe the denial today. Could one say that? Maybe we have to ask David.
I'm not really sure that I understand the way you are questioning.
I was asking whether the surrounding people around us in the community, not
you mean
in our
the
own
Swedish one or in the Turkish
I mean the
context?
Turkish, what happened, let's say 70 years ago or 80 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Were they afraid, regular people, to speak about it? Average people?
Of course they were. Now, I know that Kemal Atatürk is a very holy figure in Turkish historical writing, but he was like many modernizing persons who monopolize power to the degree that you could have called him a dictator if you wanted to. This was a totalitarian regime. He also had his show trials of his opponents and got rid of them. This was a time when you fulfilled this idea of creating a Turkish nationalism. So Syrians were called Semitic Turks, just like Kurds were called Mountain Turks, and you denied that ethnicity made a difference, and you denied even the existence of this. Everything was to be Turkified. And this meant that even up to today, in Turkey, to talk about ethnic differences, especially Armenian writers have been getting into problems, like Hrant Dink, who was the editor of Agos, just for at a conference in Urfa saying, well, it's sort of difficult to be have an Armenian identity within a Turkish identity, sort of, just saying that it's difficult. And he was
so the heritage is still that strong. You have to be Turkified.
Well, obviously for the court that brought him to trial for this, and we realized that there are different groups within Turkish society, that there are groups that want to liberalize and get rid of this strange legislation that makes such a court case possible. Like the one for Father Joseph, just saying a few words that there was a genocide. I mean, this is impossible to actually have a democracy if you can't talk or write about these things. And these laws are unfortunately still in place, but they seem not to be practiced. But we will see.
Father Joseph, I think he even related to what was written in a certain magazine, American or English magazine.
I think so, yes.
In his speech or
this is true.
May I add one more thing?
Yeah.
And that's, I want
then we have to
go back
ahead.
to Önver, the way we are dealing with it. And I think one obvious difference is that in one way, we are leaving oral tradition and coming into the literature tradition. Namely that, at least from us, from Tarabdin, for instance, the high level of illiteracy. So the way they were dealing with it was in oral way.
Poems and
songs and dances maybe, and you know, to tell from generation to generation. But with us, the younger generation, we are using literature I mean, in a broad sense, so fiction and non-fiction, and so we're dealing with in a more, so to say, literature cognitive way, and also artistic way with different means, and that's what I understand from what you're saying. It's also more productive, so to say.
Yeah. Okay, how much more does the European communities know about Sayfo? The knowledge, the Sayfo on. When I say the Sayfo, I won't mention the names on our people again, because the Sayfo is for us.
Yes. Yes.
So, on what level has the Sayfo been brought up among the Europeans?
Well, this is something that the various organizations do in Brussels, and there's been a lot of meetings there and demonstrations. And this seems to be continuing, and even at Strasbourg at the European Court. One of the reasons that I wrote the book that is going to come out in the summer was because every time we had a meeting with politicians, they said, where is the evidence? We have heard about the Armenian genocide, but is there any book, any article that we can say and have as a basis of political discussions? And there was none. And so that's...
Now you're broughting up a book. You're writing a book, so you can have the evidence.
And books are good because you can spread them wherever, and this means that you have a common base for discussing around things, whereas oral tradition can be different from one family to another, or from one group to another. One village can have a different experience than the neighboring village.
One question I have to ask you: what made it so interesting for you to have Sayfo as a subject for your studying the last 3-4 years? I think something like that.
Mostly because, well, I don't know, because I wasn't born in order to write a book about Sayfo, I must say.
Seems to be your purpose anyway, in some kind.
But it seems to be a fate, and it started because at Södertörn we have so many students with a Syriac background, or Assyrian also. And I was giving lectures on Holocaust for the Jews and for the Roma, the Gypsies, and a group of Syriac students came up afterwards and they said, well, why don't you talk about the Syriac genocide? And I said, I don't know. Give me something to read. And then they gave me Hino and some other documents from the time that we now have translated into Swedish. And I figured, well, okay. And so it's been about 8 years of this.
8 years already.
Document after document. And in the end, I learned a little Turkish in order to go to archives in Istanbul, and because it did become something that you could actually prove something, and then so many people were interested in results. And I've written a lot of books before, and there's always a little interest, but this is the one where there is the greatest interest that I have experienced, and it seems to have an importance for people who are not otherwise interested in history. So,
Önver, your field, to regard it, what level has the knowledge about Sayfo among the European?
Well, from a psychological point of view, there is, as
there
far as I know, there is none. As far as I know, I might be wrong though. From a religious point of view, none. Seems like those issues are not raised, nor within our own community, neither outside. And back to Fuat's point, this is a political issue. Knowledge is all about politics. So if we don't raise it, nobody else is going to raise it for us either. So these two go together. I'm afraid, I mean, we have a lot of studies.
What should be done then? Only raise the question, and I mean,
from a psychological point of view, we should start studying the kind of trauma, the kind of relations we have to Muslim people today, to Turkish people today, how that is affected by the historical happenings. All these issues need to be elaborated. We need to deal with them. we need to interview people, we need to study literature from specific disciplines, but that is very limited today, so there's a lot to do.
Can you go back that much? I mean, this is the 5th generation living now.
No, I mean you have to study how people today are affected by historical happenings. And as Fuat brought up, they are not so old. I mean, we have similar or happenings that have also been traumatic, not so far back. So even those are important to deal with.
Fuat, your field, sociology.
Well, in general, I would say your question: how much do European people know about Sayfo?
Yes.
And I would say nothing, if I exaggerate, because to this very few people who know something, it's elite. It's a small category, small sector of intellectuals or scholars or politicians, or there are very, very few. And of course, those are a very important category in the society, because they are making opinions, and they are shaping the public debate and the public dialogue, of course. But again, the last 10 years it has happened very much, as we talked about before, political demonstrations and scholarly texts coming now. So of course it's on a good way, it's on the track. But again, I think it's not much they know about this.
How come? I mean, the reason to that, there was a lot of already in that time from the States, US. They had a lot of in the newspapers written about that, in the Swedish media as well.
Yeah.
Well, back to 1915, 16.
Yes, I would say that it depends on how you define how much they know, what is to know. I would say that as long as you don't have knowledge in textbooks in schools, you never reach that kind of level or the spread of it in the society, because you can have happenings, you can have like David. I'm very glad and I was very happy to see his article in the most influential Swedish newspaper, Dagens Nyheter. It was an article in the very important side in the newspaper about the Sayfo. That's very, very important. I mean, you reach so many readers, but 2 weeks later it was something you read, you forgot about it, because today we are exposed to so many happenings with this global consciousness, with the media world. There's so much information. And for instance, in Sweden, we live in a multicultural society. There are a lot of ethnic groups, and every ethnic group, they want to
have their own problems.
Have their own problems, have their own issues. They want to have their own topics on the agenda, and we are just one of those people. So what I mean is to say that, or if you have the aim that the European people should have knowledge about this, it's when you have it in textbooks. And the precondition for have it in the textbooks is that you have, you have scholarly work done, first of all. Because as David said before, if you have the scholarly work, then the politicians have something to discuss or take decision on based on.
Yep.
And then maybe it could be introduced in the textbook. For instance, the whole discussion about Holocaust, well, it's very, very complex. I know very little about it, but as far as I understand, it's, like Romans and homosexual, they were also persecuted, they were also killed, but this was not written in the textbooks. It's only very, very recently that this aspects of Holocaust has been incorporated in the textbooks. Or, for instance, what was the Swedish position in the Second World War? How was its relation to the Nazi regime? It's only recently that it has been revised. And I mean, if you get in the textbooks, then you have a realistic chance to know, to say that European people know about this.
And they should know.
Oh, well, of course, if it's textbooks, yes.
Unless you don't have it, you cannot blame them for not knowing as well.
Of course. And sorry, but I want to add the last and the political. And in the end, it's a political question. So why should it be in the textbooks? Because there are so many other things to include in textbooks, isn't it? Well, from my point of view, I would say it's a question of democracy. If you have ethnic minorities living in a country, they have also the right to read about their own history. So if the Swedish government really mean that they are democratic and they represent the people, the citizen living in this society, then these different kinds should also be represented in textbooks. It's like the same argument that women using. They're saying, hey, look, the history, it has been about kings and men. Where are the women? We also want to be included.
We want to be a part of it because we have been living all that time.
Exactly.
Okay, David, you want to add something, I think, there.
Well, you know, I'm thinking, what is the actual purpose of history in this? And you can see it somehow as a kind of a medicine, that if you write it down, what has happened, this history, get things recognized by politicians, then maybe it doesn't matter whether all of the 100 million people in Europe know that a genocide has happened, because what you're really wanting to do is close a chapter in the history of a people so that you can forget even yourselves about this and go on with your lives. I think this is what people really want to do, instead of getting these old sores torn up all of the time. But this is really something that is going on all of the time because we have a situation in which an important government is saying that it definitely did not happen, and which goes against all experience that you have had. And it's this situation, I think, that is more acute than whether every young child from Bulgaria to Portugal is reading about a genocide in the Middle East.
So it's more or less the quality of people knowing than the quantity. How many?
It is not about people, it is about recognition. Actually, which is a psychological mechanism, and having to, the right people have to recognize, the right people have to admit that something happened, and so that we can normalize relationships more or less, so that it isn't a trauma every time, say, a Turkish kid comes into a school class new, or a Kurdish kid, that something can be, okay, this happened a long time ago and I've almost forgot about it, let's play football. This is what we really are out after, I think. And if history, by saying, oh, it's in a book, go to the library, you can read the book, and then you don't have to have this carrying it around in inside yourself like we do now, I think.
I agree with David. I mean, it's two sides of this. One is, so to say, for the victims to get this recognition, and that's one way to, so to say, go forward and not be the victim of the past, so to say. But the other side is also equally important, and that's the perpetrators. I mean, to recognize it was wrong, and try to work for a more tolerance and dialogue and democratic society.
I mean, it's not the people living now who did this. No. So why are they, or the Turkish government?
But I think it's very, very important in symbolical terms that they're saying, well, this happened such years ago, and it was wrong from this regime. I mean, when
we acknowledge that.
We acknowledge that. We recognize these crimes.
And this is something only a government can do.
Exactly.
So it's not a thing for an individual.
No, it's a government. I mean, take the case of Holocaust when the German post-Nazist regime, when they recognized and they
Willy Brandt.
Willy Brandt, for instance. Yeah, I mean, he said he was rebellion. He was against the Nazi regime, but he went to this monument and he said, you know, this was wrong.
What psychological effect could that make, or the difference, Önver?
I think the issue has been brought up already of recognition, and as long as we don't have that recognition, I don't think we can continue with our identity formation. because it's an ongoing process. Our culture is all the time alive, and I think we need that. We need to take a step back, get that recognition, and then continue to create healthy relations to the people who
the integration will be better then.
I mean, the integration, the relation rather to Kurdish people, to Turkish people, as well as the new people we meet in Sweden. So we need to get a recognition in order to create the healthy relations that we should create, I suppose.
To our own identity then.
Yes, well,
That's
it is
what you're
about
meaning.
us, but it's also about us in relation to
others.
our Islamic neighbors. I think that is very important for ourselves to create a good relation to these people.
David?
Yes, and I think if other non-Syriac people start wondering about what was their role during World War I think they will find many things that will surprise them. I have been able to write about many Turkish bureaucrats who refused to follow the orders and were either killed or transferred to somewhere else way down towards Baghdad instead. Many cases of Kurdish agas protecting the Christians of their villages or hiding bishops in their cellars and then being caught and then court-martialed and killed because of this.
But we don't mention that much among ourselves.
This is not mentioned, and the Kurds know a little about this, but these are the sort of people you can
Should they be
take
brought up more?
You can exactly. In the Jewish tradition, there are what is called the righteous people. People who were morally, ethically correct in the Holocaust, and they have memorials to them. And it would be very interesting if you put up in the middle of Mardin a monument to Hilmi Bey, who was one of the Mutasarrif who actually protected the Christians and was sent away for that. Or both in Midyat and Saur, also in Bashir, there were local Kaimakams who were killed because they refused to participate. They ought to also have some kind of a statue.
Yeah,
it would be interesting.
That would be interesting. Well, among our people, I mean, to recognize that good effort as well. Not only remembering what bad happened to us during that time.
I think what David is mentioning here, I think it is a very, very good example of the importance of more research. So we can, so to say, get a more detailed picture of what has happened. So we can distinguish between different years and areas and different actors.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. That is another question here. How far can we say that the different researchers has been, the scholars, how far have they reached until now? How many do we have in this area, in this field, in this topic of Sayfo?
Well, I think David mentioned this with the first question, but I think they are very few. I think they are very few.
Do we know anything more than they are few?
Yes, they are coming. Now it's a kind of, what do you call it, eruption almost of books coming. But it depends how you define scholarly done work. From my point of view, there are a lot of research done, but it's not, so to say, doesn't have the label scientific or scholarly. It's kind of a hobby researchers, like people interesting, and maybe they have interviewed their
like
parents.
Gabriela Jonan, for instance.
For instance, and that doesn't mean that it's not a valuable knowledge. Of course, the opposite. But to have this label that it's have been discussed and has been scrutinized and has been criticized. That's the procedures in this academic society, and if you use that kind of definitions, then I think you have very few texts actually, and regarding in relation to the complex topic, there's so much to be done.
Okay. Anybody want to say something?
No, I agree. I would just like to, there is another dimension of the genocide and the other traumatic experiences, I think, which is related to and very central in our culture, that is of religiosity. That is also, I think, a topic I would like to bring up a little, because I find a little paradox here of the role that religiosity had historically I suppose in relation to the older generations who experienced this. I would perhaps just very simply say that while their religiosity was a instrument of survival and an instrument for meaning in amidst those difficulties, it helped them to survive, and it helped them also to create a meaning of what actually happened.
But had it itself, had it some negative effect, being religious?
I don't think, though, in that context, because I think no matter if they were religious or not, they would have been persecuted or chased. However, is that their religion, I think, helped the people to survive on an existential level. On the other hand, and that is the paradox I find today, the same kind of religiosity is actually creating a hostile attitude,
more hatred, maybe,
and hatred against people who we identify with the persecutors. And that is, I think, how dangerous religion in itself can become if we don't know how to deal with it. And that is a total different kind of role religion has. I think we have to also to be aware of that dimension of religiosity.
David?
If I would say, I mean, research you can keep on doing, and the normal development of a scientific investigation is that you go to smaller and smaller areas and get more and more details in order to know. And this is especially important because we need to know the psychology behind why neighbors were attacking neighbors who they had been living with for generations, and sometimes knew each other's languages and went in and out of each other's houses, especially as children. We need to know very much more about Muslim-Christian relationships before Sayfo, how they were developing. We know that some Kurdish tribes actually had Syriac members. What did that actually mean?
What difference would that knowledge make?
If it is neighbors who are attacking neighbors, this was very traumatic for Poland, for instance. Poland said, yes, unfortunately our Jews are all disappeared, but it was the Nazis that did it. Then came a book very few years ago showing that in one place called Jedwabne, it was actually the neighbors who attacked the Jews and killed them all in 2 days. This made a national trauma for Poland. And this could be something that is worth dealing with. We should also have entire books about Azak and Vardo and places like that.
Wouldn't that hurt more?
Not necessarily. Not once the recognition has happened. Then it is simply filling in the spaces.
Whole picture, then.
We need to know more about Beshire and Botan, where we don't know very much about. Entire villages disappeared. Adiyaman district, we have almost no information about that. These are places that young people can start studying.
Your recommendation to go deeper in your studies.
And then the first period of refugee existence in Jazeera and in northern Iraq is really very important. How you try to build up from the ruins of your life some kind of internal structure would be very interesting. How people found each other afterwards, after they were lost and were looking for children in different places. This is a fascinating thing, actually.
The difficulties. I mean, what kind of difficulties are you facing when you're doing these kind of researches?
You don't want to do research that is easy. no scientific point in that. And the more difficult, the more we are challenged. So this is not something that is really frightening.
There's no paradox in that.
No.
Well, but again, you have to see that the topic is so complex, and I think it's really demanding to do research on this topic, and not least because the language problems. There are documents in so many different languages, and also until very recently the problem to have access to the archives. So there is a lot of course at the same time challenges. But I would also say that if you are yourself a member of the community and you do research on this topic, it's have some kind of psychological aspects. Because as a scientist, your goal, your aim is to produce valid knowledge, to produce. Well, it's maybe hard today to say objective knowledge, because that's from a certain point of theory about science, and we don't have time to discuss that. But
okay.
But at least valid knowledge. I think we can agree on that. And in one way, it's very good to be engaged with your topic, to have good motive or strong motives. But the other side is that it shouldn't affect your procedures and the quality of your research. And I think in this context, it's very important to make a distinction between production of knowledge and production of ideology. And as a scholar, the ideal is you're producing knowledge, valid knowledge, because sometimes, at least from my experience, is that there are some kind of expectations from the community that you maybe sometimes could pass the borders for what is scientific knowledge.
The expectation on you as
on me
one
as a
of
scholar,
the member of the community,
yes, as the community.
Suroyo.
So I mean, we must distinguish between these two tasks. It's a question of division of labor.
Yeah.
That scholars, they're doing their scholarly work and following the rules of scientific work, and other political organizations, they have their task.
Yeah. Before we proceed on that question, David, you're free to take more water and Önver as well, so we can take that away. We have it in the picture, in the total picture.
Yeah.
So, how objective are we? At least our knowledge. How objective is our knowledge? Are we the ones who are facing or looking at the reality, or are we building up our own reality as we want to? What happened that time?
Well,
I mean, for David's case, he's one outsider in this case. So, yeah, you're free to answer if you want. Otherwise,
but all scientists want to be as objective as possible. That's why we always talk about sources or evidence or some kind of proof, and that proof should we want to be as many different kinds of proof as possible, because we're like detectives. A crime has happened or something like that, and there's nobody around to tell about this. We have to look at this thing, and we become experts in languages in order to read these kind of documents. We have to find out about terrain. We have to know about politics and these sort of things. You also have to be a little amateur psychologist to figure out, well, what were they thinking about? What are they going to do next? Do you look around in that? And in these ways, we build up kind of a detective's kind of theory about what is actually happening. And then we question ourselves all the time. Okay, is my interpretation of this crime correct? Did it actually work this way or not? And then in the end we assemble all of the evidence, and then we hope that the readers will be kind of a jury. And and then in the jury situation, it can be that someone is still got something in the back of their heads that makes them over enthusiastic or over negative Others will read it sort of right up and down. But our striving is always to have objective. And that's why we do things over and over again also, just to see in case we were wrong the first time.
Önver, is it hard to be objective? Or the knowledge we have, is it objective? Is it two different questions maybe, but I mean one of the community.
I mean, I think that is the base of science, to be self-critical all the time. So as soon as you find out that you're sure about something, then you should start thinking again. I think that is science. So, and of course it is difficult to be objective, but I think we learn the method as scholars, and that's what we should do. So in that sense, I'm not worried about it.
It's a burden, Fuad, to have this purpose in same time, that being one of the people, one of the community, to be objective, and I mean you have to be objective, but nevertheless your people, your own, wants you to really find out the things they want to hear about in many cases.
I mean, this is not a unique situation for us. This is the case for every scholar who has belonged to a community, and obviously every scholar belongs to a community, and the community always has expectation on the scholar. It could be like the feminist movement, who have expectation on the
Women's maybe?
Women's who are doing research, and they want to have a certain version of the reality or else. So this is the case with all national movements. So it's one thing to scholarly study nationalism, and it's another thing to be a nationalist yourself. But since we are members of community, obviously we have different roles. So I would say it's not an easy question, but you can solve it. It demands some effort from you. And now I'm talking from my own experience. When I was doing my conducting my research on my dissertation, I could feel this pressure on me, but I can probably say that I could solve those questions. But still, it was a psychological burden to deal, because what David and Önver mentioned is that when you're conducting research, it's not only that you're self-critical, but it's also institutionalized in the activity in itself. So you are socialized into a certain way to think and work, as David talking about, to be a detective. So what you depend on heavily is your colleagues, because you are continuously presenting parts of your research for your colleagues, and they give you critique, because to do research in one way, it's very something you do very lonely, but at the same time you deal it continuously with your other colleagues, and they give you critics, and you have your tutors, your professor, who give you opinions about the text. And from my point of view, that's what actually helps you, because that points to the weaknesses or biases in your text.
Would it be easier for you to write about the Armenians, for instance, the genocide on the Armenian, as Fuad, as the person, one of the community, Suroyo?
Well, you know, it is advantages and disadvantages when it's coming to doing research. The most obvious advantage when you do a research, something that you feel strongly for, is that you have the energy. Because to do research is very demanding. It takes so long time. It takes years to publish a book. So you have to have enough energy to carry on, so to say. And also, if you know a lot about the topic, for instance, me and Önver, we've written about our own community, and as a members, we know so much. So
that is easy part in it.
That's advantages. But the disadvantages is these things with expectations, and maybe you're taking too much responsibility on you. You feel that this book has to solve the situation for the community, and that could also, of course, be too much, so to say.
Önver, and then we have David as well. I would like to ask you. When you did your research, religious psychology of religion, the expectations maybe from the church's side, or the religious people, or your own religiosity, What dilemma did you have?
I think I would go a step back and say they probably didn't have much expectations.
Maybe they didn't even know.
No, they probably don't still know about the book.
Have they no spies?
I did have some experiences though, and I would like to bring them forth because I think they are very important for future studies and political issues. The division between the Arameans and the Assyrians play a big role in our work as researchers because they want to play a part in that work I do, and that is not their business, I would say. But I have had experiences of how they would intervene, not giving me access to some information.
From both sides, you mean?
From both sides, definitely. So in that case, we have to, I think, go back to the issue that knowledge is about power, and what we try to create does have effect on someone, even within our own community. So I would face those issues all the time. And I still do that in my way of choosing the title of the dissertation had also a role. I chose the emic word of Suroyo instead of Assyrian or Aramean. That is also a political
What response did you get?
Well, so far nothing, which means good or bad. I mean, whatever we do is always political as researchers. So we're not kind of free from that.
David?
Well, I would say that it's different parts of research that are more sensitive than others. It's fairly easy to find out what actually happened, the facts, a massacre, deportation, mass rape, these things. It's when you try to answer the question why that you can be uncertain. And where
that is about the objective.
No, well, you see, in some cases you have to actually find out whether a massacre actually happened.
Okay.
Whether it's sort of like whether the rat goes to the right or the left in a labyrinth. Did the massacre happen or not? Because
but that was quite obvious, you said.
Well, about 10 years ago, there were people who said, well, there weren't enough Syriacs or Assyrians even in the Ottoman Empire that there could have been a genocide. So that first you have to say there were people. They were this ethnic and religious group, and they were killed in these numbers. So that then you have to interpret it. Why does this happen? And there you can have, and I think all, this is what our scientific discussions are actually about, because you have different interpretations about it. When I present things for my Armenian friends, they always say, well, there are differences between what happened to Syriacs and Assyrians compared with the Armenians. You had massacres in the villages, whereas we had deportations. We had a political movement. There was not in the Assyrian and Syriac cases. Why did these things happen? Then we have to compare sort of why things didn't happen. Why did the Assyrian Nestorian groups manage to build up a political movement after the war that was pretty effective, whereas the Syriac groups did not? Why were they? Was this a continuation of a disunity that was even before the war, which it may be, or not? So these are things that are that the questioning leads to. We ask why things happened and why things didn't happen, all the time.
90 years ago, still affecting the youth, the identity of the youth. Is this something, could one find something positive in this? At least to regard, has it made a positive effect that the communities stick together and trying to support each other in this sense? Or is it only negative? I mean, the negative side we know already.
Yes, we know about the negative side, but it's also so huge, the negative sides. You cannot limit the consequences.
So one cannot compare this to.
No,
together.
it's like very different categories. They have different weights. But nonetheless, you could of course point some, side effects of happenings, side effects, and in the studies of ethnicity and ethnic identities, or identities in general, it's shown that a minority group, a group who is in subordinated position, they're always put under pressure. If you are a Christian in the Muslim world, or if you're a foreigner in Sweden, or if you're homosexual in a heterosexual society, or you're always reminded about who you are, because you are the other. You are the one who is deviant.
And left out. And
left out.
So
you're the opposite of, so to say, what's to be normal. You're the opposite of the center, of the norm. And this you're reminded in different ways, in different contexts, in different societies. It can be more violent, less violent, and so on. But still, you are the other. And that makes that you are more conscious about your collective identity, because your surrounding, the majority, are always pointing at that you are different. And the more you are different, or reminding about your differences, the stronger your identity will be. So if you want to point at some side effects, we could say that this kind of traumatic happenings or crimes, they encourage or strengthen the collective consciousness, and I think they are still doing so. They're working as a kind of a social bond.
Önver, could one say that we have been strengthened in that way?
Oh, definitely. I think that is what Fuat is just bringing up.
Yeah.
It has created a sense of community. I mean, community is nothing just which is established in itself. It is recreated all the time, and this gives a sense of belonging together. So in that sense, it has helped this community to not to assimilate, and keep some traditions and then passing them over, because that's what culture is about, I think, passing over a certain way of living, some values, some practices, etc. So this has definitely contributed to that sense of community and that culture. It means that we collect memories in order to create our culture today. So
and the community, you're born not to a direct community, but you get into a direct community with your all heritage brought together.
No, I mean, what I'm saying, that the community is not there in itself. I think you have to recreate it. So, and you do that through these practices you deal with, either in your history or today in contemporary times. So it is our community as Assyrians is all the time recreated.
I mean, in the end, a community is experiences together. That's what make people bonding. And I mean, taken on an individual level, the people you have important experience together with, it could be friends or your partner or something, you feel very strongly attached to these people. But if you don't see each other a long time and you don't make new experiences, that bond, it becomes more and more weakened. So it's common experiences
that makes a community stronger, or
yes,
at least the relations among the community itself, the members of the community.
Yes, and that means that the community becomes stronger, because a community is those bonds.
The youth, the identity of the youth, is it stronger as one of the community, Suroyo or Suroyo, today than it was?
I would like to put it this way, rather, because this my way of approaching the issue of identification it is more a practice oriented, as well as Fuat does, I think, is that And to exemplify that, I think we could again take the genocide as an example. I think we have to be careful in discussing this in this relation to our identities, because it is a practice and there are different strategies how we use those historical events in order to identify ourselves today. So it's not always, back to your question, always negative or positive. It is in sometimes we use that as a way to as a strategical way to differentiate ourselves today from other people. So Sayfo is not anymore just a innocent act in itself, or as we as the victims. It is by us today, I think.
What is the danger of
well, the danger,
strategies?
I think, is when we don't know what we're actually doing or what this results in. Because when I identify myself in my history, and when I say that the Turks, the Kurds, or the Islamic people are the bad people who have done this and that to me or my ancestors, then I create a difference between communities, between people, which in the long run is very dangerous for all of us. So I think we also have to be careful that Sayfo is not just a positive, the effects of Sayfo are not just positive today.
Cannot be used as a positive method to strengthen the community.
It does.
There is a dangerous
it does, as well as
that.
it does also create differences, and that is the dangerous aspect, as far as I find it.
Well, it was very, very interesting. We have already passed over our time. I thank you very much for being here. Fuat Deniz, PhD from Örebro University, lecturer as well in sociology. David Gaunt, professor of history or in history. And we have Önver Cetrez as well, PhD, Uppsala University, psychology of religion. Thank you very much for being here talking about Sayfo issue.
Thank you.
فرجونا الحين ماركي وزبنادا تايم مستعملا اشمو زد مزبنادا استبالكي موخاك من الخون كتلان صبرت قادريتو فهميتو مدد درش لنا ديوماك متيقنو سكيتو غالبا ما فرجونا وصو لشانية سلو بس لقاوي ناخد عامو إلا وكان شوت كعيشينا بقاوي ستقودر موت اللي سبوثاثت فهم بقاو دروحينا مفتكاري كتلان وديوما أبث صوبو أيضا منشكل كحيري بيسبوثو دو سيفو مقا قتل عاموي ومقا اسكي تاثيره مدد مرد قريش لو زوهوريذي يعني كي بحدهم رجل دحم شو ديما تقعوش وتاثير دو سيفو وأدي ما ماتي بلكي الدرغو أبو حونة كسويم كي بن ملتمي أنا تايج توتر بشكل توتر دولي يثرون دو عاميدا وسيفو خد قتل عاموك محزي مغلبة خساور عدو كلوزم عبرنا هيش بو عم قيدة لجن قدرنا مفهمينا قي هافي وبوشكلاو قدرنا احنا سسخرينا مكتب زبنو بثرينا دلتوي مفصحون ومدد كتوي ماذرون ولحنا خد عام وخلنا خلحلتو كتلبنا الخون يوم باسيمي وفوشون بشلومه